you.
To the last panel, and this is the high-level remarks based of our event. And I will invite our high-level speakers to actually come to tell us and some of your remarks that you have prepared. And I will introduce you one by one. And let me start by Prime Minister Gaston Brown of Antigua Barbuda. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you today, and thank you so much for receiving us all in your beautiful country, and also for organizing this major conference. And it's, the outcome of this will be for the best in the development community. And please, I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and certainly welcome again to all of you, and thank you very much for your participation. This SIDS conference is actually turning out to be a very exciting one, and I'm pretty sure that the next decade will see significant improvements within SIDS as we all strive to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But as you know, our agenda goes beyond achieving the SDGs. We also expect that we'll be able to look at other areas of development, include the blue economy, and to close the gaps that exist, to include the issue of data, building capacity, absorptive capacity, and at the same time to continue to agitate and to fight for more funding, especially concessional funding and grants, because the reality is SIDS, especially those that are middle income SIDS and high income SIDS, have been precluded from much needed development financing. And I certainly want to thank the DAC for this partnership, because we have not been speaking to each other, we've been really speaking at each other. And we felt too that the current financial architecture is such that it needs to be reformed to be more inclusive and to ensure that small island states, especially those that are considered to be middle and high income small island states, that they have a seat at the table, and that they can also access much needed technical assistance, the technologies, as well as funding. I mean, if we are going to achieve the SDGs within the next decade, clearly we need funding. We can't do it without funding. And if we find that SIDS have been at a major disadvantage, you've had a situation in which large countries can borrow cheaply. They can borrow on the various stock markets, or even on a bilateral basis at 2-3%, whereas middle and high income SIDS have had to borrow at commercial rates up to 14% at one point. In fact, the average rate of borrowing today is between 8 and 10% for middle and high income SIDS. And other countries, poor developing states, LDCs and LLDCs, and they too have the capacity to borrow at concessional rates. So the entities that have been excluded from this type of concessional funding are really the SIDS, especially the middle and high income SIDS. So to some extent, they have been literally punished for their relative success in increasing the per capita income. We've argued that the per capita income criteria is not inclusive. It is exclusionary as far as SIDS are concerned, and that is why we have done a significant amount of work to develop the multidimensional vulnerability index. That index is now with the Intergovernmental Committee, and we hope to have the index go through the UNGA this September for adoption. And I certainly want to appeal to all stakeholders to support the MVI, because the MVI is more inclusive. And whereas it doesn't necessarily, let's say, it doesn't necessarily, or would not necessarily result in automatic increased funding for SIDS or any other country for that matter. But what it does, it assists countries to make the case for additional funding. So it is more inclusive, it is more universal in its application. I know that there's some developing countries, LLDCs and LDCs, who are concerned about the impact of the MPI on existing funding. But SIDS are so small and their requirements are so small that there will not be any impact. And in any event, as I said before, the MPI does not necessarily justify or would necessarily result in any direct increase in funding. All it does is to help countries to make the case for additional funding, and also to strengthen the planning capabilities of countries, all developing countries for that matter, in that you'll have more timely and accurate data. In fact, as we developed the MBI, we observed that there are a number of critical indicators that had to be excluded because we didn't have reliable data. And we all know too that within SIDS that the issue of data is a fundamental issue. And I certainly want to commend this partnership in terms of helping SIDS to address that data gap that exists. And I think this is one of the ways in which the DAC could help us. But certainly the use of the MPI will be very important going forward to ensure that these countries will be in a better position to make the case for funding. And especially too when these countries are faced with crises, multiple crises. I mean, within recent times we would have seen the global crisis, the situation with the pandemic. And when you have countries that were considered to be relatively wealthy, that the economies are decimated by these crises through no fault of theirs, and you use the historical data of GNI per capita to determine need, there's something extremely vulgar about that. Clearly that is inequitable. And that is why we've made the point that we're also fighting within SIDS for financial justice, because you can't have a situation in which practically all of the different sets of countries developed and LLDCs, LDCs, that they have access to cheap funding, but then you have a small group of vulnerable countries, namely SIDS, that do not have access to, let's say, affordable funding, or let's say cheap money for that matter. That in itself is a fundamental gap that ought to be addressed. And if you look at it from the standpoint of equity, I don't see how the DAC or the international community for that matter, the IFIs, how they could continue to exclude the most vulnerable set of countries in the world from much needed assistance with development. I mean, it is an injustice that exists within the global financial architecture that has to be corrected. And I'm very pleased that this partnership is now coming on board, and that will form part of the VAS going forward as we seek greater equity for SIDS. So it's not just about climate justice, it's also about financial justice. And the DAC should really look at the need, and certainly the MPI, it creates a new lens in which you can determine whether another country is in need of ODA or concessional funding. So I certainly support this initiative and the fact that you're helping us to build capacity even post SDGs. The blue economy represents a significant amount of opportunities in that SIDS in particular, they are large ocean states, and with the marine resources or oceanic resources, I'm quite sure that with the support for research and development to harness these oceanic resources in a sustainable way, that the blue economy could be a major source of revenue for SIDS. And even from the standpoint of the food security, I mean, I'm quite sure that the issue of food security will become even more critical as you look at the impact of climate change. I mean, many of our countries, even within this region, the precipitation has fallen significantly. We have had situations here in Antigua and Barbuda in which we have had no more than 18 inches of rain annually. It means therefore that you cannot grow crops on a sustainable basis. And we find that we have had to import more of our foods. So as we look at the issue of food security, the marine environment will become even more important in terms of harvesting fish and fish products for consumption to make sure that we can feed ourselves. And this is where that can help us to build capacity so that we can ensure that there's sustainable harvesting and use of our marine resources, and even to develop export products so that we can be better integrated within the international trading community, because one of the problems that SIDS has is that we do not have the capacity to develop goods that we can trade within the international trading system in a competitive way. But I believe within the marine space that we have a number of products, provided we're able to harvest them on a sustainable basis, that we can create new export markets and at the same time to increase revenues in order to sustain ourselves and certainly to meet our obligations. So once again, I want to thank you for this engagement, and I hope that this will be an engagement that will be sustained in a meaningful way, and that we will look at practical solutions to address these issues that I'm confronting SIDS, and that the DAC will be realigned to take into consideration the peculiarities of SIDS and to ensure that there is a more inclusive framework going forward. So once again, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Khalid. And now let me turn to the Honorable Lord Richard Benyon, our Minister of State for Climate, Environment and Energy from the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for the leadership of your country in helping us, as the Prime Minister said, talk to each other instead of at each other, and to find mutual understanding in this way to fulfill that sustainable sort of pathway, and where we support each other and leverage each other as a community. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Excellency, for hosting us in this wonderful country, and for your leadership with Fiamme, who I gather was here earlier, for co-chairing this task force and for speaking so powerfully just now. I agree with everything you said, and it's really important that we move this agenda forward at this SIDS meeting, and I welcome SIDS being more robust and setting out clearly what they expect of the international community, and the question is whether the rest of the international community is listening. And the real purpose of this task force was to tackle that point, and was to make sure that some of the least vulnerable in the international system and donors from the OECD were really listening to some of the most vulnerable SIDS. And the partnership that is being launched today represents true progress. And I'm grateful to all the members of the task force for their work over the past 18 months to get us to this stage. But the real test, one of the three hearing tests I heard, is that whether the international system really does reflect change, to reflect what SIDS have been saying. And you've heard today, at present, systems for international finance, green finance, simply are not fit for purpose if you're a small island state. On the one hand, a sudden disaster can set a small island's economy back years in just a matter of hours. On the other, a few years of successful growth can rob your economy of vital resources almost overnight. At the point they passed the ODA graduation threshold, SIDS received, on average, 19 times more of their external finance as ODA than other countries. So I'm glad to hear that the Glasgow Climate Pact set out the simple proposition that vulnerability should be a factor in decisions about finance, very much reflecting His Excellency's comments earlier, and that today's partnership includes a commitment to look at ODA eligibility constraints and look at how to improve flexibility within ODA graduation rules. Crucially, we need to take vulnerability into account, and that is what Britain will be arguing for in the months ahead. This is not about believing aid cures all ills, or that SIDS should forever rely on donors. It's about believing that if we want such states, stewards of around a third of the world's oceans, to develop sustainable ocean economies, and that this requires sustainable financing. There are other issues which we must also address to make international financing truly sustainable for SIDS. We need to offer enough funding we need to make it easier to access, and we need to spend it effectively. Today's partnership and Britain are also seeking to address this. The UK has invested in technical assistance for SIDS to help achieve these goals, and this partnership also contributes to this, with commitments on data collection, sharing technical expertise, and building up SIDS capacity to absorb funding. Like you, I am not interested in numbers in a briefing or on a spreadsheet. I'm interested in what we can achieve. With this partnership, we'll be able to achieve more together, and I thank you and I thank everyone in this room for their support on this important venture.
Thank you very much. And there's not much for me to say, but to say actually that I feel really proud, you Prime Minister, of what we have accomplished, and also with the Prime Minister from Samoa and with the support of the UK. This is actually really new for the DAC to do, co-create and listen to each other and find a way to find a mutual understanding. And one of those pathways, this is something I would look forward to continue replicating in the DAC with the broader community. And now we will, please just feel yourself assured that we will continue to support as OECD in this and in the areas that you have identified. And I just thank you all and congratulations for the great work. And with this, have a beautiful afternoon.
Thank you.
Hello.